Welcome to the Adoption Side by Side podcast, because no one should have to walk the adoption journey alone. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Steph. We walk the journey together, and we want to walk it with you if you'll have us.
Well, joining us for today's episode on the topic we love to say was the most stressful thing for us that should not have been our home studies. And my caseworker, Molly Childs, she works with Caring Adoption Associates. She did our home study. She made it a breeze for us, made us feel much more comfortable with the process. So she's here today to hopefully reassure you too that you can do it. It's obtainable. So Molly, welcome. We really appreciate your time, your willingness to be here today. To start off, do you want to talk about how long you have been in this social work field and what led you to pursue that kind of work?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun. I love to be part of your new podcast. So goodness, what started me in this process? I've been in the field since 2002. It's a really long story, so I'll give you the condensed version. I actually thought I was meant to be a teacher. I was actually a kindergarten teacher, went back to school for counseling. I was a school counselor for a couple of years. And I just told this story to my students because I also teach at a college level that, it's so important to be flexible. Back in the day, we answered ads when we were looking for new jobs. So when I moved to Pennsylvania, the other side of the state, I answered an ad and I was like, wow, this is amazing because I'm so passionate about families and I think everyone deserves to have a family who can. And I answered an ad and and I've been in it for 24 years since. I've never, changed. I moved to the other side of the state. So I have changed from foster care to private adoption. That's probably the biggest change in my career. But,
Okay.
I just really feel like it was, just the job I was meant for.
Now, were you always home study caseworker, like on the foster side of it, or did you do?
Yeah, well,
there?
yes and no. So when I worked for a really amazing agency called Kids Peace, they're actually all over the country. They're national, several states that they're not in, but they are a national organization and they are amazing. And they work with all different aspects from foster care to adoption, but they also have different schools and residential facilities. Like they cast a real wide net. So I started out working with foster to adopt. That was kind of my specialty. So I worked with children, counseling them, and that were preparing for adoption. That were in the first foster care that were most likely going to move into the adoption arena. So I worked individually with children, preparing them for that process, and then also with the families. So in preparing, a lot of our families. So we had 3 divisions, one that was strictly foster care, one that was strictly adoption, and then the foster to adopt. I did that for many years. And then I moved into the private sector more when, 2005 or 6. And I did both for a while. And then, as you guys know, you get busy raising kids. And so I just moved into strictly private.
Yep. And obviously that's where we met through, was your work in this. So to kick off this important topic of the home study, can you describe what types of documents we need to be collecting during that home study process? Because I feel like a lot of people get overwhelmed at the thought of that. And I use the example, I'm pretty sure I said this in my episode with my personal story. I actually picked your organization because you very clearly online gave me the list of exactly what I needed. I appreciated that up front. So if you just want to share the basics of what you need to collect.
This is a very important part of the process. And I wish all my families were like you and were very organized and prepared and had everything ready for me. That is often, it can be overwhelming. I'm not a very organized person, so I understand that. I'm not sure I could collect my birth certificates for everyone in the families. And you need time to do this, right? Which is why we post it online so that you can kind of organize your thoughts and know how long it's going to take you to collect all these things. Some people have to send away for some of this, documents, because we need, you want me to give you the whole list?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. So clearances are a very important part of this process. So we do state criminal clearances, we do state child abuse clearances, and we also do FBI clearances. Important to note that the state criminal and child abuse are for anyone over 14 and older in the house.
Okay.
So sometimes, if a family has children in the home, that's important to know. FBI is for anyone over 18 in the house. And then if you live in any other state in the last 5 years, we also need clearances, child abuse clearances from that state. That's something that can be a little time consuming.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really important piece. So we send you a list, an email. We start with an email with all the documents, and then with some attachments that have a financial form, a reference form, and a physical form, because we need physicals for everyone in the house completed, signed by the physician. We need the financial form completed, which is just like organizing the finances and the bills. 3 references in Pennsylvania. That's different state by state, but in Pennsylvania, it's 2 non-family members and 1 family member. As for the financial piece, we do 3 years of taxes, which is the first 2 pages of the 1040. We also do 3 months of bank statements. And I always get the question with that one of like, well, which bank account? And I'm like, it's up to you. Just, whatever you want represented, because I can only put in the home study what you send me. So if you want it all included, then send me it all. If you just want one included, it just depends family to family, We send out like a questionnaire, just some information that we expect to be filled out. If anyone has a record that shows up on any of their clearances, we need that kind of situation explained. For example, DUIs are probably the most common that we've seen. So we just need to get a deposition printed out saying that they completed the process of whatever their process was,
Sure.
Fines, probation, classes, whatever, that are common, things like that. It's not the end of the world. I get that question a lot. Like, well, what if I have a record of some sort? It's not the end of the world. We just have to include an explanation and anything from that. Copies of any training is helpful, especially if you're doing an international adoption, because head training is quite different than any domestic training. Birth certificates for everybody in the family. If you have pets, vaccination records for any animals, copy of driver's license, marriage certificate, divorce decrees, if that is something that pertains to you, and copy of your mortgage statement or deed. And I think in the last one is employee letters, employee verification, or W-2s. We can take either one to verify employment.
Okay.
I know I've been asked a lot, and I don't really know the answer, but why do we need the physical forms? I know a lot of people are like, why did you need a physical to adopt? And I don't think I ever answer that well, because I don't know the answer for it. So why are the physicals important?
Right. So the short answer is because the state always requires it, right? I mean, that's what, and you're never going to get approved for interstate compact, which is an important part of that process. We can talk about that as well. But the other thing is that, so we go in Pennsylvania and do an in-person home visit face-to-face once, which is 2 hours. So I am relying on my clients to be very honest and upfront with me. That is 95% true. But what you consider to be a health issue and what I consider to be a health issue may be different, right? So you may forget to mention that you have, lupus. I'm just throwing something out that I've heard in the last month. You may forget to mention that. So when I get your doctor's physical form, they will mention that. Just because we like to note in the home study if you have a health issue that could possibly, affect your parenting longevity or your parenting in general. And also, something that sometimes we need a doctor's letter to support your adoption. For example, most common is when lupus is one, maybe somebody was diagnosed with cancer and they're in remission. We need a letter from the doctor stating the treatment, the prognosis, and things, such. And that's just a state law, and so that it kind of just verifies what is going on medically, because again, we are relying on transparency from our families, but we can't guarantee that. And it's just another way to kind of safeguard the process. Another reason is, and I know you probably didn't expect this to be so long-winded, is mental health reasons. So a lot of times we don't know what the family's on if they don't share with us what their diagnosis is or what their treatment is, how they're being treated. Are they seeing a psychiatrist, or are they seeing a therapist? And often it matches what the family, most often it matches what the family says, but it's just safeguarding just so that we know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
does.
no, it does. It does. And I think it's important too, because as you're that hopeful parent who many of them don't have kids yet, some do, of course, but
Yeah,
especially for first
right.
time parents, you're thinking through those things. Like for me, we've talked about this on the podcast. I'm a type 1 diabetic. So I need to think about how does that affect my parenting? What are things I can do to prepare myself health wise for taking on the role of parenting? So it's also, I feel like, a good
Right.
opportunity to think through those things. And
Right,
cetera.
exactly. And I didn't want to mention that because I didn't know if you had brought it up.
That's
Because
fine.
that's something that we see a lot.
Yeah.
Probably the most common. That and mental health issues are probably the most common, are the type 1 diabetes. And another thing that we factor in is, what is your support system? So you're not feeling very well, or you're having, a reaction of some sort. Who do you call? Does your mom live down the street? That's awesome. You're lucky. But if not, who are your people? Who are your friends that you can call on? That's important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Can you describe what kind of interview questions might be asked, either during the paperwork gathering stage or in the in-person home visit?
Oh my goodness. So many. So I can kind of walk you through the steps that I take after this long. I think I do probably the exact same way. Although conversations go, I don't really use a format anymore. There's several of them out there that most agencies recommend using. I've been doing this for so long. I always think a great warm up is when a family's nervous, is your neighborhood. Because I've been doing this for so long in this part of the state. You would think I've been in every single neighborhood. I'm always shocked. I'm like, wow, where am I? And what school district is this? So that's always a great opener because everyone usually loves where they live, and then they can just tell me about the neighborhood, the school district, the borough that they're in, how close are they to shopping and doctor's appointments. So that's always kind of a nice icebreaker going in, because that's all an important part of the home study. So that's always a good way to start. And then which leads into a description of the house. Even though I do a tour, I always have the family describe everything just in case I miss things. So, because that's always included in the home, bedrooms, bathrooms, So I give a full description of the house. So that's always great, like little icebreaker, because it kind of makes everyone comfortable.
Right.
Before we get into the harder things. And then I kind of roll into what they do for a living. And we roll right into, well, when they're not working, what do you like to do for fun? What are your hobbies? How did you meet? How did your relationship evolve from dating to getting married? And what motivated you to start this process? Like, why am I here? Like, what made you, because it truly is different for, so many people. Like, what motivated you to want to adopt, to start this process? By the time I'm in your home, you're pretty solid in your decision to adopt. So you've had hopefully many, many conversations, often over a course of years.
Sure.
A lot of couples start having this conversation before they get married. Everyone's a lot more familiar with adoption than they used to be. So I think a lot of couples tend to have this conversation much earlier than years ago. What motivated you to start the process? In what ways have you prepared for the process, especially if there's infertility? How did you deal with that? How did you process that? And what led you to choose adoption. And then we kind of move on a little bit more to, are you churchgoers? Is your faith an important part of your life? If so, how would you feel if a child wanted to explore other avenues? What is your support system? Who's around you when you need some help? Childcare, guardianship, if God forbid things would happen to you. So that's all together with both individuals. And then I do an individual interview of background. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Who raised you? A description of, how would you describe your mom? How would you describe your dad? Where do they live? How were you raised? Special memories? Who was the disciplinarian? What did that look like? How would you describe your parents' parenting style? We know for a fact that most often we tend to parent like we were parented.
Right.
So this is an important part of the process. And often people don't want to parent. So I ask, do you think your parenting style is going to be similar to your parents? And it's great if the answer is yes, but sometimes people are like, I don't know about that. But how would that look different? Sometimes people don't want to parent like their parent, and that's a process in itself to figure out how you'll be able to do things differently when that has been your example.
Right.
So who were the more positive influences when you were a child if you didn't have that in your parents? And how will you model that? And I do that separately for both parents, for each parent, I mean. So including siblings and where everybody lives. And with that background, individually comes like, where did you graduate from high school, and did you have further schooling after that, and work experience and things like that, and then just kind of ties it all together at the end.
Makes sense. A couple questions I came up with just from that I'm curious about. You'd mentioned about doing part together about your home, your neighborhood, and then doing the individual questions. At least when we did it, it wasn't like we were separated, but you were asking us.
Right.
I have heard some people talk about they were separated. Is that a common thing, or?
It is pretty common.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not necessary, but it is common.
Okay.
I don't find it necessary. I feel like most times the one couple would kind of go to the bathroom, get something to drink, and putz around. We're all in this together. Whatever's being said is going to put in the home study, and you're going to read it.
Right.
So, so I don't really find that quite necessary. But people do that. I'm trying to think when I did the foster to adopt profiles, if I did that, I don't think I did.
Okay. I know I had read about that before we did ours, so I wasn't sure if that's how it would happen or not. But just was curious for people that may also be hearing that.
I think that would make people really nervous. My goal is to always make, as you know, people to feel very comfortable. Like I always say, you guys are probably a little young for the after school specials. Like most people think like, this is like a scary after school special where like, the caseworker's coming in the house with their, white glove. And it's really not like that. It's just, I want people to feel comfortable because then you're more likely to be yourself.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
No, and I remember
when you're separating people, then you get some major nerves kick in.
Yeah.
And
it just feels very intense.
That I would get the same answers.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how often I sit across. So I may ask a male prospective parent to describe their dad, and they go, and then they'll look at their wife and go, what do you think? And it's not that she's answering for them, but they'll have like a little discussion, and that's kind of fun for me to see. I love to see them communicating like that. There's still a lot of things that I can't see in the 2 hours I'm there if I separate you for an hour of that,
Right. And ours was different. Ours was, we were given all of our questions and were asked to answer them before they came to the house because it was like still in that COVID period.
That's interesting.
And so we did ours.
I've never done that. So I wouldn't,
I mean, she still asked questions.
If it was only because of COVID?
I don't know. And like I've said, I'll use them if we adopt or when we adopt again. So I'll find out if it's still the same way or now that we're so far removed from that.
Yeah.
But that was interesting too, because she still asked questions and like interviewed us when she was at the house. But the majority of all those questions you listed, we answered and sent in with our home study paperwork before they came.
So that's interesting. Did you do an autobiography?
Yes, but not 10 pages.
Yeah, wasn't ours 10 pages or
It was
I just
long.
got like a 27-page one. I was like, okay.
Yeah. It was long, but not that. I forget how long it had to be. But we did that because I remember sitting like, what are we going to write in this? And
I know.
I was panicked.
I forgot to mention the autobiographies when you asked about the paperwork collected. That's the only piece that we at Caring Adoption Associates collects before we go out for a home study visit is the autobiography, because it's really helpful to just read through and get a sense of who you are before I go out. I mean, friends and family ask me all the time, how do you go in and out of people's homes? I'm like, it's so fun. Like, how do you, really, truly, like, I think people just think, again, back to the after school, special nightmares of like going into people's homes. I'm like, no, like generally human nature is just, like, people are so nice. It's not like anything, people think the worst, I guess.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of rural areas in Pennsylvania. And so there's sometimes where I'm like, whoa, where am I? I'm in the middle of nowhere. But it is really fun. And so your autobiography is truly like kind of how I get to know you before I walk into your home. And I do find it to be I read every single one of them.
I had a friend who, in thinking about adoption, they were asking us some questions. And one of the things they asked about was when you're talking through the couple's families, their support system, one of the two in the couple had asked me, their parents are divorced. And they said, is that a problem? Like, does that look bad? And I said, I can't imagine because there's so many blended families, but just to ask that question for clarification, how would you answer
no issues whatsoever. Okay. I mean, honestly, we really 50% at least. I'd say it's more unusual to have both of the prospective parents sitting down at the table who have both parents married.
Yeah.
Because 50%, I'd say, is the rate, right?
Sure.
So there's no issue whatsoever. And a divorced parents does not mean that they are not both very supportive
Right.
and involved in the family.
Right.
And often you get those bonus parents as well, which
Right.
are wonderfully supportive and loving and caring and,
Right.
and more love and care for that child,
Yeah.
So it is not a concern.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, we have prospective parents that have been divorced themselves and remarried, and we don't have any issue with that as well. I mean, we talk through that process in the home study a little bit when somebody was divorced, of like loosely, without getting too, I mean, we don't make a big deal about it, but just kind of what happened with that breakdown and then what led to when you were ready to start the new relationship type of thing.
Yeah.
Generally, because of the age group that again, general terms, people wanting to have a child for the first time, or maybe a little bit younger. Often it's somebody who was married for a very short period of time.
I guess my hope would be that if the couple that one of them has been divorced, or one set of the prospective grandparents, I would hope if that is something they've worked through and dealt with those emotions and maybe have that blended family now. That's a great example for your child.
Absolutely.
Because you're blending your family often by having an open relationship with their family, their bio family. And
yep, absolutely. And if that's not the case, I'd say most often we do see, like, especially by the time the prospective parent is an adult themselves, their families kind of work through that process.
Right.
And it's all right, fine.
Sure.
But if it's not the case, that's also important to talk about. How will you share they share in the grandparenting if those parents are not simpatico or not blended families, doesn't work well together?
Sure.
Yeah.
I had a friend who was looking at the adoption process but not sure what they're going to do, and they have weapons in the house. And it was asked,
great question.
Are we able to adopt because we have these weapons? And I said, I personally cannot answer that question because we did not, so I don't know what that part of the home study process looks like. I said, but I do know that doesn't mean you cannot adopt. There's just an extra set of steps you have to go through. And obviously they have to be locked up and all that. So can you talk on that piece just briefly for listeners?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. We see many families that have weapons in the home. All we ask is that they are locked in a safe. I always ask what type of lock it is, and I have to see it. Is it digital? Is it keyed? If it's keyed, where they store the key, and then the ammunition needs to be separated as well. New safes that are actually really secure. This is I'm mentioning this because this is a little tricky because we do ask the ammunition to be separate. They have those safes within a safe. So they have a shelf in the small refrigerator size safe. And then you open up the gun safe, and then inside there is an ammunition safe. So those are fine as well. They are separate in there, but because those seem to be very common.
Okay.
And another thing to know as well, because I have to say the other most important safety feature, guns, and then the other one, swimming pools that have to be protected.
Like a fence, their own fence around them.
Yeah, with a lock.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the two kind of like biggest ones. We do safety wise, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide, fire extinguisher, things like that. But the guns and the pools are the ones that make me the most nervous. But they have more particular safety features.
What would be the things you most often ask families to change, make improvements to after viewing their home?
Definitely swimming pool safety is probably the biggest one, because it's not, they may be fenced, but maybe it's not locked, as something like that. And so that is the biggest one. And separating the ammunition from weapons, is obviously probably the biggest one too. Otherwise, you said to change, right?
Or maybe just like a recommendation of improve this, or
because there's no mandate on child safety yet, because that would be kind of cruel to do if you don't have a child in the home yet.
Sure.
Right.
So you don't have anything like that or any preparation. So I would say that would be the pools and the weapons.
Okay.
Right.
In Pennsylvania, it's pretty easy for us because you cannot get homeowners insurance without smoke detectors on each floor. And so that made my job a little easier in Pennsylvania because that's already mandated. If somebody's renting, then that is the other one, is probably additional smoke detectors in a child's room or second floor of the house or basement, type of thing.
Yeah. Because I do know that was something we had gates up, and I mentioned this in our personal story, at the top of our steps, the bottom of our steps, and somewhere else, not because we had a child in the house already, but because of our dogs. We wanted to keep them from different spots when we weren't home. And our caseworker went, oh, look, you're already child-proofed on your steps. And I just rolled with it, but I was like, yeah, it's not really for the baby because that's not a thing just yet, but it was for my dogs. But then I can say, and I want to know your perspective, our medicine cabinet is up. And I asked her, I said, is it okay that it's not locked or anything? And she said, yeah, it's not a problem. She goes, you might want to get a lock for it. She goes, but that's not something that she was like specifically looking for. Is that the case as well? Because I mean, it was up, and now talking about it, I probably should get a lock on it because my child is a monkey. And
is older, right. Yeah.
Now,
I mean, the bottom line is we cannot be there when you have a 4-year-old who's climbing those counters,
right.
And can get up there, right? Like, I mean, our post-placement services are typically done at around 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, some of the reason. So when I worked in the foster to adopt, that was a little different because we were working with older children. So those are the type of things that we were Johnny on the spot about because we had to be, because that was important. So those things had to be locked up. But when we're talking about private adoption for infants, then we don't really, we can talk to you about those things and stuff, but you, generally speaking, when you're finalized,
it changes. So then are there any other huge differences between the home study for a family private adoption and a family that's pursuing the foster to adopt? What are other significant differences in those two arenas?
Well, the biggest one is, if you're doing foster to adopt, you really, as a caseworker, helping that family prepare for reunification. That's the goal. And that has to remain the goal. So I think that is the biggest difference. As far as like if you have an older child in the home, things may be different because you're going to also have somebody who is working with that child. So you're going to have a little bit more of traffic with caseworkers in and out of your home. But if you're working in the foster adopt with, let's just say, a younger child or preparing a family for foster to adopt, the big difference is you're really working with that family on a regular basis on reunification. And that can be tricky. And so I'd never recommend somebody to choose that route unless they know that's the goal. It works beautifully if a family wants to adopt and they can through that foster to adopt. But ultimately the goal is reunification. So, that's the biggest difference. So you have to know that going into foster adopt.
It's a big perspective difference than doing the private adoption. That was something we both said. That's why we started with private, because not that we're not saying we would never have a heart to do that, but we didn't think that was the emotional place we were in.
No, and I think and I have that conversation a lot with families. And then I always say, well, but maybe you'll change your mind down the road. It's a great, really a wonderful process. And I just think that foster to adopt is really amazing. And maybe after you go through private once or even twice, then you would feel like you would have a better picture and a better understanding of birth parents and the reunification process. And then maybe you would feel more comfortable with it.
Yeah. We've had friends that have done that their first adoption was private and then they were in a place to foster, and if it worked out, great, and they did end up adopting a set of brothers, so it worked out for their family.
You just have to know in your heart that you can do it. Some people are like, absolutely not, cannot for me, and other people are like, okay, well, I think no. You just have to kind of different stages of life. I think
absolutely.
That's where my husband and I are. His youngest sister is foster to adopt, but we both said 1, if not 2, infant private adoption, and then we could see ourselves fostering, but we've also said our son and then like the next one will always be the oldest in the family.
Yes.
So we don't want anybody that's older than them. And then we just had this conversation a week or two ago that if both of our children are boys, we only foster boys. just for that safety, like just our own hearts felt like that that safety concern. Or if it's a boy and a girl, okay, then we do both. But just just watching
I think
that
it's
too,
important
and that's
to have
because
those
he walked through it.
conversations. Yeah, to have the conversations, to do some research. I hear that a lot when I was working at foster adopt. Like nobody really wanted to knock their child off of their where they fell in the line of children, right? Right, especially the oldest, right? They didn't want to adopt somebody or do fostering for a child that was older. And I always say to everybody who goes into foster adopt, stick to your guns. I don't want to offend anybody on this podcast, but sometimes you can be talked into, well, what about this child she's only a couple years older than what you had put on your, you requested. I always say stick to your guns. There's children of all ages, and it may take a little bit longer to for the right child to come to your family, but it's important to not be talked into doing something you don't want to do.
Right. No, I think that's true too, even private adoption experience with saying yes to cases. I mean, there were things that were like, for some reason, we just don't feel comfortable with this one, even though maybe we should, there just was something. So I think it's important not to get into I'm so tired of waiting. It's just.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Not that you shouldn't, think through your options, but, and have an open mind, but it is important once you and your spouse have had those conversations.
And hopefully you can keep each other in check a little bit, because it is hard on your heart to get a phone call. Yeah. And said, this may not be the right fit for you, right? So I think that it's nice that you kind of bounce that stuff off of each other and kind of have these conversations. Okay, let's sleep on this and have a conversation versus jumping on something that you don't think is right.
No, and I know we both did that when walking through it, where we'd be, because we saw the same cases since we were working with the same consultant group. Yeah. She would be like, oh, we said no, or we said yes already. And I said, well, Alex and I are taking a day to think about it. Either something didn't sit right with one of us, or, we just needed more time. That was always important. There would be cases I would read and I'd be like, nope, absolutely not. And he'd be like, why? Like, what? And we'd talk about it and then pray and then be like, okay, we're going to do whatever. And there was one case specifically that I was like, I don't have a problem. And he goes, no, we're not saying yes. And he talked me through his reasoning. And I went, I can understand that and be okay with that. And we ended up saying no to that case. And you're in it together. So you need to make every single decision together and be completely backed by each other.
And I think
I'm curious along those lines, because I wonder this. Let me ask you a question. So having said that, so you both had cases that came forward that you were not very comfortable with, that you ultimately said no, and that wasn't the right fit for you. So would you prefer having cases and saying no to, and having that conversation, and then to have nothing brought to you? Were you glad that you had multiple cases come to you, even though they weren't great fits?
Yeah.
Just so you could have this conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, because even, and Andrea knows this, and even listeners, if they're still listening after this many episodes, our very first case was a very difficult case. And Andrea, a couple days after it came through, was like, how did you do with that case?
Because I had been seeing them for a few months before
she knew
they were getting cases.
That this case was not a normal case.
Yeah.
And my husband and I both kind of struggled with it because this child was already here. She was just a few weeks old. She had a very serious health issue. And we took a day to research it and talk to a physician to say, can you explain this so that we have the best knowledge to say yes or no? Because my mama heartstrings were being pulled that I was saying yes because that baby needed a mama. But my rational side was saying, hold up. Can you handle, not that I can't handle a child with a need or anything, but our lifestyle? Could that baby fit into our lifestyle because of the disease she had? And that was hard, but I was glad that we had that one kind of at the beginning now looking back, because it showed me that, okay, we can get through the hard cases and make a decision on yes or no. And I mean, we saw 21 cases total, and I just looked at it the other day. We had said 11 no's, which shocked me because I thought we said yes more often than not. But
interesting.
Yes, because I was convinced we were more yeses than no's. I liked that we had the full gamut of everything to say yes or no to make the decisions for ourselves. And everybody knows that we had 2 yeses out there whenever we did match. And the case that we matched with, absolutely perfect baby for us, perfect situation for us. God knew what he was doing. But the other case, we were convinced that was the one we were going to match with just because it aligns so much with us.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
I know for us, yeah.
And I think too, one difference though for us as opposed to maybe like getting a call about a potential foster placement is most of the cases we see are for children who are not born yet.
Right.
So there's a slightly less, because just like she said about the child who was born, it is that this baby needs someone right now. So that can be harder, I think, on.
Yeah, for sure.
But
yeah, that definitely tugs on your heartstrings for sure.
But I do know when we were in the same consultant group, we really only saw the same cases for maybe 2 or 3 months before my
just the summer months.
There was just a brief time we were seeing the exact same cases. And it was interesting. Of course, we didn't talk in depth about these. Like,
no, we wouldn't text and be like, hey, are you saying yes or no to that one?
Right.
But we would kind of check in with each other after the fact, and I'd be like, yeah, we said yes to one. And she'd be like, oh, was it this one? So we kept it very general at that time of our lives. But it was very interesting how even just our families that are a little bit similar in nature, we were saying yes to completely opposite things. So I think it's good to know, like, there's going to be a family for that child, even if you feel you can't.
I was going to say the same thing when you were talking about that first conversation with the child that was born. I'm like, and I'm sure she went to an amazing family.
Absolutely.
Right? Because there's somebody out there for everybody. I was so curious about that because sometimes I have families say when I go back, so your home study in Pennsylvania is good for 3 years, but it has to be updated every year. So you get 2 updates within that 3-year period before you start all over, right? So, and let me just say, it's very rare other than the COVID time where people need to do home study, right? So if I go out for an update and a couple may say that they're disappointed because they haven't had any conversations, and I'm like, well, if you say that you're so specific about a child in your home study and you're not very broad and you're saying no to drugs and alcohol whatsoever, I'm like, yeah, you're kind of limiting yourself a little bit, So a lot of placing agencies will not even allow couples anymore to say hard no on drugs and alcohol. You have to be willing to have some on a case-by-case basis. Those exposures are just part of this process a little bit, and it's hard, I think, for agencies to guarantee that there's been no exposure. Sure. So I always, when I first meet with a family, I'll say, I think it's important to be part of the conversation. There's a process here to be, have cases that you're a part of the conversation. Have your home study be pretty wide. Like this is your broadest part right here. So maybe open your age group, your ethnicities, your exposures to drugs and alcohol and, things like that, your openness for contact with birth parent, have this be the open, your most broad, so that you are brought to the table to have these conversations. Yeah. So I'm glad that you both feel like that was part of the process for you a healthy part of the process, because I just think instead of just waiting for that one perfect opportunity, it's nice to have conversations along the way.
There were conversations we had before we ever started seeing cases about what are things that are hard no's for us and what are things we're open to discussing. Right. I feel like while we did have some boundaries, there definitely were ones that were this is just an open discussion. We'll review this on a case-by-case basis. And I think you had encouraged us too in the home study with different things like wording on age groups and exposures and stuff. Like you said, to leave it as broad as possible, because what if a situation did come up that we felt was good, but that wording was not in our home study because we were so narrow in what we initially said. So
and we can do addendums when that happens. I have to say that's our most common addendum to a home study, is if a couple will feel very deflated and frustrated with the process because there's no possible matches, right? No conversations with their caseworker on possible matches, and then they'll reach out to me and say, well, can we do an addendum to open up for age group or ethnicity? That's a big one. Or drugs. I'm like, sure, we can do that for you, and so we'll add an addendum to it. And I guess, it's important for couples to come to that realization when they are ready instead of forcing it. And we certainly don't force it. We just have a conversation about it and say, this is why. That is probably the biggest thing that changes when I go back for that update.
Yeah.
If they even wait that long. Sometimes it's an addendum halfway through.
Yeah. This time that you are waiting is just a time to continue education, continue learning about what it means to have a family that is now made up of multiple ethnicities, what it means to consider those different exposures.
Well, yeah, and ethnicity especially, because we had the mindset that we were okay with anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I can say, while waiting and seeing cases and taking classes, I was then thinking about the area we lived in, and I thought about it prior because I didn't want to bring a child in that maybe there wasn't anything in our area that could help us bring them up with our beliefs, but then, you know, their culture or whatever, if it's different. But I was thinking, like, specifically, if I had a little girl who needed her hair done, who would help me with that? And I was actually going back in my mind to students I had in pre-K who, even the boys, their hair came in and was beautifully done. I was like, well, I will be calling that family to see if they can help, you know, because that's things you have to think about that we don't do as a white Caucasian family. I don't do things to my hair differently as a family of African American descent. Their hair texture is different and all of that. So just thinking about that. And then I know for us, drug exposures were a little different than you, just because we had the background and the support to do a little bit more if we did get a child that had a little bit more, because just our background as teachers, and then my husband's mom being a pediatric nurse. But those are all things that everybody has to think about before even writing out your home study. You need to know all of that. But then as you learn more about it, you do get a little bit more comfortable with it. But then I can say also during classes, as I was doing the classes with Jack, there were a couple that I was like, I'm not sure I'm okay with that drug anymore, just because of what I've learned about it. And the research that's been done. Maybe we should watch that one.
I think you both pointed out also that, you know, how important the process was with having conversations with your spouses during that too. And I think it kind of assures, it's hard to know, like, in everyone, when you're starting this process, to know, like, where you're going to kind of evolve when you're going through the matching process. And so I think sometimes when you have these conversations, you learn a lot about each other as well.
Yes, absolutely. So many different people will say to us, and we definitely experienced this, we were just so nervous to do this home study process. And
we thought you were going to come in with the white glove and touch everything.
So what advice can you give to put families' minds at ease as they're thinking about launching into this process? We've tried to really hype up our home studies, be like, it was fine, it was all good. But you tell us, what from your perspective can you say to help us be a little less nerve-wracking for families?
So I wish I could put everyone's mind at ease with this question, because this is my most common, like, week before the home visit. So is there anything I need? You know, and I can tell that they're just really worked up, right? They'll contact me and I'm like, there's really not, you know, I just need you both to be home. I need a tour of the house. So as I mentioned before, I do definitely do a description. I have to say, I really do love walking into a clean house. It's not mandatory, but it is nice for me because I give a description. So it makes my description a lot more warm and fuzzy, per se.
Sure.
Like, when if I can say, that it was, clutter free and nice and organized and blah, 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 because I give a description on the house, right? So that's lovely when I don't have to be like, oh boy, how am I going to describe this room if somebody's, hasn't cleaned the house for, nice. So I have to say that is nice. Not mandatory, but it is nice. But otherwise, I mean, truly, I think it's important to know that it's not being judged. It's really just we're just going to have a conversation so I can learn what is the best child that's going to fit into your lifestyle, your family, So it's not, I think people are like, I will do a complete 2-hour interview and somebody will say, did we pass?
I did that. I wrote the first thing. I was like, excuse me, am I okay if we tell people? Because we were terrified we wouldn't pass.
It's important to know, at least with Caring Adoption Association, it's not like we are going to, there's no, okay, maybe if you have no job, if you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
There are some hard no's. Okay, don't get me wrong. Like, we need to know that you can financially support a child and that you are not, within reason, your criminal background check is not a concern, or you're not, and again, back to the physicals, that you are mostly healthy young adult. So anyway, mostly it's just not like that. It's more having this conversation to determine, your readiness to start a family, right? Because adoption's forever. to determine your understanding of adoption being forever, right? This is your child
Right.
by law. Just like if you give birth, like this child has the same rights, right? So we want to make sure that you are ready for this. That states that in the finalization document. If I'm sure you both read, right? This is forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, changing your mind. So that kind of readiness. It's also a tool, the home study visit, to make sure that both adoptive parents are kind of are on the same page, and stuff. So it's more of a readiness interview than it is pass fail per se,
Sure.
like a lot of people think. And again, most come in completely like doing their homework, having their paperwork ready. They've come in, they've processed this. They've had many conversations together with their spouse. If there is a spouse, we have more single women adopting now. They're having the conversation, like what kind of research have you done, and such. So I think that's what I try to tell my families before the home visit is, oh my goodness, we're just going to sit around the table and we're just going to talk about, your readiness to start this process and try to frame it like a conversation.
You had mentioned too about young adults adopting. What would Pennsylvania's laws be in terms of age? Is there like age restriction for parents adopting?
It's a really good question. I'm sure we do have one.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had to look it up.
Yeah.
Because
well, I know
I've never had anybody under like 25 want to adopt. I think it is around 25, but I'll be curious what that is.
And is there like upper age cutoff, you would say? Because I know some agencies I see posts, one parent has to be over.
For home studies, we don't. So I don't think Pennsylvania, again, we probably do have a cutoff, but I know that I've had families up in their 60s.
Okay.
But a lot of times those individuals are adopting like an older child.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like you're not going to put an infant into, a couple who are 60s. Mm-hmm. But if we have a teenager, that type of situation. Yeah. So that's where I think there may not be any hard laws or rules against it because a lot of it just depends on the child's age.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We have a lot of grandparents who adopt older children.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense.
So kind of like a twofold, I guess. What is the primary reason for a home study and why is it so important for any part of the adoption process, whether it's private, foster care to adopt? Because a lot of people ask that too. I know I got it a lot when we were first adopting. Why do you have to do a home study? Why does somebody need to come in and see the house and ask you questions? If you were pregnant, nobody does that. So why is the home study so important?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've been doing this for so long. I'm like, wow, somebody would really wonder that. Like, I've been trying to imagine a birth mother giving their child to some, random person that they know nothing about with no checks and balances. I can't even would that even be a thing? Would adoption even be around if we didn't have home studies? Because birth parents really care about who's going to raise their child and they want to know.
I think that's such a misconception of birth families.
Did you guys read the book? It may have been a hard read for you. Relinquished?
Mm-mm. I've heard of it, and I've heard it's a hard read.
It's a hard read. Yeah. I have to say, it's a hard read. Yeah. But an important one. Yeah. It's an important one. Yeah, I listened to it. It was good, but it was definitely been in this field a long time, and I was like, wow. Okay. Yeah. It's a tough one. Anyway, but yeah, you have to think of it that way. We live in this amazing country where birth parents can have choice, right? So they get to choose. So the home study process, they know this family has been fully vetted. Not only that, with all of the mandatory paperwork that the state mandates, right? All the list of paperwork that we went through already. So they know all the criminal background checks. They know that the physical forms. They know, all this paperwork's been done. They get to learn about the family because that's important. They get to see the pictures. The home study is really the catalyst to kind of get that ball rolling. You both probably work with agencies that said, okay, get your home study done and then we'll go from there. So your home study is what checks all the boxes as far as interstate compact. So we know that you're not going to get to Ohio to adopt a child and not have all that paperwork completed. So a lot of it's law-based for sure. But to me, that it really comes down to the birth parent. We want to give that individual as much information about you that we legally can so that they feel good about making a choice. there's power in choice, right? So
Yeah.
they'll feel better about their decision if they know the type of parent that child is going to.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah,
It sure does,
no,
yes.
absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
then it also ties in with that whole readiness thing. Just found out a month ago that you have infertility issues. Maybe we need to slow down this process a little bit.
Right.
And that happens. I mean, some people like to move steamroll forward, right? And that's their way of dealing with things. And sometimes we'd be like, let's just slow this process down a little bit. So I think that both of those are tied in together.
Yeah.
And then with all of that, you stated that Caring Adoption Associates is just a home study agency. So how does that make you different from me going to an agency and being able to sign up with them to actually adopt a child? Just briefly, the difference between those two.
Yeah, that's a great question. So a home study agency like Caring Adoption Associates, so we work with our families who want to adopt outside of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
So we can also work with families inside of Pennsylvania, which is fine, especially because it's a very big state. So my city doesn't have a lot of private adoption agencies. So my family could work with anybody in the entire country. And I will be doing their home study because you need a local caseworker who's going to do your home visit, who's going to do your home study, who's going to make sure that you are completely ready by law, that your paperwork is all done. So you need that local person. So most of my families work with agencies in Florida, California, Arizona, Utah, all over the country. And I'm their local PA worker. And then I also, we didn't even touch on post-placement visits. And that's a big part of this. So if your child's born in Arizona, we're still held responsible until finalization, which is 6 months later, right? So your post-placement visits need to be done by your home study agency and your local person. So that would be me. And then I send those reports to Interstate Compact for both Pennsylvania and Arizona. And then your Arizona agency gets them as well, because it's important for that county to know that that child is being so well cared for, because they are ultimately still responsible until finalization. That takes 6 months. So there's a portion of that. Just because you're adopting doesn't mean the day the child comes out of the hospital, you're done. So that home study also ties into that. The state where the child came from, they need to know. And they're relying on me to do that, your home study agency. Everything's in order.
The reason in this interview for listeners that we are not really talking too much about the post-placement side is because we do have a separate episode on that, which Stephanie's caseworker recorded for us. So we recorded out of order. So we recorded that one several weeks ago, but it'll air later. So where can prospective Pennsylvania adoptive families go to read more about your agency and your services?
Well, we have a website, caringadoptionassociates.com. We cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. I mean, we go pretty much everywhere, all over the state. So that's a great place to start, is on the website and contacting. We get a lot of referrals from lawyers and also the 1-800-ADOPT phone number, because I think it's hard. It can be a challenge, not hard, but a challenge to find a home study agency. There's not a whole lot of us, but it's an important part of the process if you want to use placing agency out of state.
I think that's all of our questions.
I think so
good.
too. Yes. So thank you so much, Molly, for being here to answer these questions and talk about the home study process with us today. We appreciate your time, and that if anybody in the area of Pennsylvania is looking for a home study agency, they can call or look up Caring Adoption Associates online. So thank you so much, Molly.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. That was really fun. I enjoyed talking to you girls.
All right, let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are just thankful for the episode that we were able to record about home studies. And we just pray that that would put peace in prospective adoptive families' hearts and minds, that the process is not there to harm them, that it is there to help them, to reassure them, and to just make sure that they are ready to fully go ahead with an adoption. We thank you for the people that are in place to help with that, and that we would be a light in this world for those who need it. Amen. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find us on any major podcast platform and on Instagram, Adoption Side by Side, to listen to more episodes and follow along in our personal adoption journeys as they change.